Ladies, I need you to picture something for me. A dark, silent house. No soft lullabies, no mother's touch. Just silence. Except for one sound. A tiny, desperate cry. Then another. Two little babies, alone, hungry, cold. One is barely a week old. A newborn, so fragile, so helpless, her tiny lips turning blue from starvation. The other? A 1-year-old, sitting in a filthy diaper, abandoned for hours. And their mother? Not rocking them, not feeding them, not even there. No, because she was at a bar, laughing, drinking, living her best life. But before she even stepped foot inside that bar, she pre-gamed. She drank an entire 6-pack of beer, then got in her car and crashed into a pole. And when the police found her, they noticed a car seat in the back and asked the simplest question. Do you have kids? And she lied. She said, no. Number, can you imagine? Her babies were starving, crying in the dark, and she just erased them, like they didn't exist. Ladies, as mothers, as grandmothers, as women, how does that sit with you? Because I'll tell you right now, it doesn't sit right with me. And trust me, this story, it only gets worse. Welcome to True Crime Stories videos. I welcome you, my viewers, and most especially my subscribers, for your support as we keep improving and bringing you daily told and untold true crime stories. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It started with a sound that no mother should ever ignore. A tiny, fragile cry. Weak. Barely there. And then another. Louder, more desperate. A 1-year-old wailing in distress. But the cries weren't coming from a nursery where a mother gently soothes her child back to sleep. Number, they echoed through the walls of an empty, dark house. Because there was no mother there. Just 2 babies. Alone. Abandoned. Trapped in filth. One of them? A 9-day-old newborn. So fragile, so helpless, its tiny lips were turning blue. Why? Because it was starving. And the other? A 1-year-old, sitting in a soaked, soiled diaper for hours, maybe all night. Crying, reaching out for someone. Anyone. But no one came. Because their mother. She was busy. And by busy, I mean she was knocking back beers at a bar. Oh, but don't worry. She had a game plan. She didn't just head straight to the bar. No. First, she had herself a little pre-game session, chugged down a 6-pack of Budweiser, because apparently drinking at the bar wasn't enough. Then, in all her beer-fueled brilliance, she got behind the wheel and drove herself to the bar. And shocker, she didn't make it. She crashed into a pole. Now, here's where things get even more disturbing. When the police arrived, they noticed a car seat in the back and asked her, do you have any kids? And she lied. No. She didn't hesitate, didn't blink. She erased them. As if those 2 little babies, crying their lungs out in that empty house, didn't even exist. But here's the thing about babies. They don't stay silent forever. And when those little cries turned into desperate wails, someone finally heard them. A neighbor. And that neighbor called 911. And thank God they did. Because when police broke down the door, what they found, it was worse than anyone could have imagined. And trust me, ladies, this story is only getting started. Where was their mother, Sandra Henriquez? Well, she had other priorities. And no, it wasn't rocking her newborn to sleep. It wasn't kissing her babies goodnight. It was Budweiser. A 6-pack of 16-ounce beers, because apparently nothing says responsible parenting like pre-gaming before a night out. Oh, but she wasn't done yet. After knocking back those 6 beers, Sandra made a brilliant decision. She got behind the wheel and hit the road. Because why stop at child neglect when you can add drunk driving to the mix? And here's the plot twist no one saw coming. She didn't make it to the bar. because just a few blocks away, in her beer-fueled brilliance, she crashed into a pole. Now, let's pause for a second. She left a 9-day-old newborn and a 1-year-old toddler alone at home, drank herself stupid, got in a car and wrapped it around a pole. And when officers found her, slurring her words, wobbling, a complete mess. And then they noticed something in the back seat. A car seat. So naturally they asked, "Do you have kids?" And this woman, this mother, she lied. No. Number. Like those 2 little babies didn't even exist. Like they weren't lying in that dark house, starving, soaked in filth, crying for someone who was too busy chasing her next drink. But oh, Sandra wasn't done being reckless just yet. Because when officers took her to jail, she suddenly remembered something. About 30 minutes later, she casually mentioned, "Oh yeah, I do have kids." But when they asked for her home address, she refused to give it, wouldn't say a word, didn't care that her newborn was slowly turning blue from malnutrition, didn't care that her 1-year-old had been sitting in their own waste for hours. Her babies were suffering in silence. And Sandra? She was sitting in jail, more concerned about covering her own tracks than saving her own children. And if you think this is bad, ladies, it gets worse. But fate has a way of revealing the truth. At 7:22 a.m., police found Sandra. Her car, wrapped around a pole, her speech slurred, her breath reeking of alcohol, and sitting right there in the back seat was something that made officers' stomachs drop. A baby car seat. So they asked her the most basic, most crucial question. "Ma'am, do you have children?" And with zero hesitation, she said, "No." Number like her 2 helpless babies didn't exist. Like they weren't crying in a dark house, desperate for food, desperate for comfort. Like they weren't alone. She lied. She refused to tell police where her babies were. But lies don't stop the truth from clawing its way to the surface. Because hours later, as Sandra sat in a jail cell, probably nursing a hangover, neighbors heard something that wouldn't stop. The sound of babies crying. It started as a whimper, then a wail, then a desperate, heartbreaking plea. And it never stopped. One neighbor listened, then another, and then finally someone called 911. By the time police arrived, those cries had grown weaker. They knocked on the door. No answer. They shouted. Nothing. So they forced their way inside. And what they found would haunt them forever. In the middle of the room, sitting in filth, was a 1-year-old child, face red from crying, diaper soiled beyond recognition. And in the crib was a 9-day-old newborn. But this baby wasn't crying anymore. This baby's lips were blue, his tiny fingers, his fragile toes, cold to the touch. He was malnourished, starving, dying, because the person who was supposed to protect him was too busy drinking, too busy lying, too busy choosing herself over the 2 innocent lives she brought into this world. And if the police had been just a few hours later, this wouldn't be a rescue story, it would be a tragedy. But ladies, it gets worse. It was a race against time. Neighbors had called 911. The babies wouldn't stop crying. And when officers arrived, no one came to the door. No sound of an adult. No movement. Just that eerie, gut-wrenching silence. Then, a faint whimper. A baby's last bit of strength, fading. That's when officers made their choice. No more waiting. No more knocking. They kicked down the door, and inside, pure horror. Beer cans, scattered everywhere. A dog in a cage, starving, dehydrated, whimpering. And in the middle of it all, 2 tiny, helpless children. The 1-year-old, red-faced, exhausted from crying. The 9-day-old, too weak to cry, his lips turning blue, his tiny fists, ice cold. When the officer picked him up, the baby barely moved, 3 to walk away after leaving a newborn to starve. Let that sink in. A 9-day-old baby, barely clinging to life. A 1-year-old, crying so long he lost his voice. And for that, a bond that's less than a luxury vacation. Ladies, I ask you, is this justice? If this were your grandchild, your niece, your daughter's baby, would this be enough? Because let's be real. If Sandra Henriquez had been caught stealing a car, she'd be facing harsher charges. But leaving 2 innocent babies to suffer alone. The system says, $42,500 should do it. And what about those babies? The newborn still fights for his life. Doctors say he could have suffered long-term damage. Because hunger like that, it scars the brain. And the toddler? He may never understand what happened to him. But trauma like this? It lingers. So here's the million-dollar question. What happens when Sandra gets out? Because let's be honest, she will. Will she change? Or will she do it again? And the next time, will someone be there to stop it? Because let's not forget, she lied. She refused to tell police she even had children. And when they found those babies, weak, starving, abandoned, she showed no remorse. Not one tear. So I ask again, is this justice? Or is it just another slap on the wrist? And one day soon, will we be hearing her name again? Here's the real tragedy. These babies will grow up. And one day, whether they're 13 or 30, they'll learn the truth. They'll learn that while they were crying, starving, suffering, their mother was drinking, laughing, partying. The one person meant to protect them was the one who put them in danger. And that truth, it won't just hurt, it will haunt them. Because how do you ever process that? How do you move on knowing your own mother chose a beer over you? And let's not pretend this was just one bad decision. She didn't forget them in a moment of panic. She left them, ignored their cries. And when police found her, she lied. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she didn't care. So I want to hear from you. What should happen to her? Should she get a second chance? Or should she never see her babies again? Because let's be real. If a father had done this, would we even be asking that question? Would we be debating second chances, or would we be demanding justice? So let's talk. Drop a comment below. Tell me, does this punishment fit the crime? And if you believe in justice for these babies, share this video. Because more people need to hear this story, more people need to wake up. And maybe, just maybe, the next time a child cries for help, someone will actually listen.